Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamie, and welcome to AXA Coral Live. It's fantastic to have you all with us for this What is Coral live lesson. Now, before we get started, I just want to introduce you to the fact we're in the Southern Caribbean. We're at a research station. We'll go through what a research station is in a bit. But if you hear a pump filling oxygen cylinders or air cylinders behind us, or some bangs and waves and everything else, that's because we are in the place that coral science happens, and it's great to have you all with us. It's amazing, we've got so many schools today. We've got from Britain, UK, Bermuda and Australia joining us, and some very, very special shout outs. We've got Brunswick Primary School say hi. A big hello back from Coral Live. We've got hello to Year 6 at St Edward's Catholic Primary in Sheerness. Wonderful to have you with us. Year 6 at Penthorpe School in Rudgwick. Great to have you back on Coral Live. Elsa and Louis, apparently working so hard during Coral Week. Big shout out to Year 5 at Clitha Primary, who are watching from their classroom in South Wales. Hello to all you guys in South Wales. Hi to everyone from St Mary's in Overton-on-Dee. We all need to look after our wonderful planet, including the amazing coral reefs. Couldn't agree with you more, and we'll be finding out a little more about that during this live lesson. And please say hello to our amazing Year 4 class at St Catherine's in Launceston, who want to look after the oceans and be climate change heroes. Well, that is fantastic. Climate change heroes, coral heroes. Let's hope we can all get to that in just 45 minutes' time. A little bit of housekeeping. So you can see the chat app beside the video. If you're a teacher, you want to have the video full screen at the front of the class, that's great. You can always use the chat app on a secondary device like a mobile, so you can just record what your class are asking. And I think there is a quiz up at the moment. Is coral A, an animal, B, a vegetable, or C, a mineral? Have a think about that during our introduction, and we'll come to the answer in just a while. So get your questions in. Also, if there are any technical issues during the live lesson, there's a, sorry, don't use the chat box, but there's a little button, chat button, bottom right of every screen. Click on that, and Sim, the amazing Sim, is in London moderating, and we have Ellie behind the camera here. So there's a team supporting you through today's lesson. So we're in the Southern Caribbean. We're at a research station called Carmarby. And that is on the island of Curacao. And this idea of a research station, if you think about science, is all this amazing science going on in laboratories and test tubes and all these kind of things. But if you're studying the natural world, like a coral reef, it's really useful to be sort of next door to it. And the fantastic thing about Carmarby, this research station here, we've got all the accommodation for visiting scientists, we've got wet labs, we've got dive kits, we've got dry labs, and the labs are places where you can do some research. So you can be out on the reef, collecting your samples, whether that's coral samples, or sponge samples, or water samples, and bring those back to do analysis, all in the same place. So we have scientists come off here, and it's this simply spectacular habitat. And very shortly, we'll show you our favorite patch of coral, which is just around the corner here. So brilliant to welcome you, and we will start thinking about our incredible edible polyp, and that is how we're going to discover a little bit more about this amazing, amazing part of the natural world. So very quickly, can I have a quick show of hands? A big hands up if you've seen the film Finding Nemo. Okay, higher, like put them properly up, not just a little up. That's better, that's better. So quite a few of you, I can see, have seen Finding Nemo. And all we're going to do today is we're going to find out about the place that Nemo lives. Now, we're not going to find Nemo here quick, because the whole sort of aside, Nemo's clownfish don't live in the Caribbean. They only live over the other side of the world, Great Barrier Reef, places like that. But we're going to find out the kind of thing that makes his home. Now, I'm just going to check to see how you've got on with the quiz. We've got 57% mineral and 43% animal, okay? So all of you who said mineral, oh, here we go. This is a big bit of coral reef, and it's pretty minerally. It's a kind of rock, and its science name is calcium carbonate, and you may come across it as limestone or even as chalk. So everybody who put down mineral, there's some big bits of mineral that make up the coral reef. Ooh. Everyone who said animal, 56% of you said animal, 44% mineral. I may have got that the wrong way around to begin with. You're absolutely correct. Now, the coral polyp is in fact an animal. And what we're going to do today is we're going to learn more about the animal that makes up the coral reef. And we're going to do that with a little bit of food. So you can either do this activity, this incredible edible polyp activity with me live, or you can get the instructions and do it later, whether that's at home in another class or an after-school club. So what you need, I'm going to hold these up. First of all, you need a banana, or potentially a huge marshmallow, or even a segment of cucumber. Then you will need some crackers or biscuits. Make sure they're sort of quite hard ones, not too crumbly, like these. You'll need some jam. So jam is going to be a very important part, or any other sort of sticky spread will do. You'll need some long twizzly bits, sort of, you know, sweets, candy, that type of thing. Or you can use segments of something like carrot as well, if you don't want to have sweets at this time of day. Lastly, some little sprinkly bits. I'm using sugar sprinkles, green sugar sprinkles at the moment, but you can use chopped herbs if you're doing a savory version. That is also absolutely great. And then a couple of implements. I've got a spoon for my jam, and I've got a knife to cut up bananas and that kind of thing. You don't need a sharp knife. It can just be an ordinary sort of knife. I mean, it doesn't have to be a sharp kitchen knife. And the last thing that you'll need are some toothpicks. These will come in very, very useful in just a moment. Now, I've got all these on a plate in front of me. Let's move things around. And what we're going to do is we're going to start cutting in just a bit, but I'm going to tell you just a sort of, you know, some basics about the coral animal. So coral is related to jellyfish. So I think you're all familiar with the jellyfish, sort of body and tentacles like this. All of you who had your hand up will definitely be familiar with an anemone, which is a bit like a jellyfish. They're all in the same big family, stuck to the bottom of the sea, bottom of the ocean. So with its tentacles like that. Now, a coral animal, a coral polyp, is related to the jellyfish and to the sea anemone, but it's a wee bit smaller. So often about the size of sort of pinhead, but can get sort of like 10-15 centimeters across for the largest polyps. There are lots of different types of coral out there. So I'm just going to start to make my coral animal. I'm just going to turn the banana around. I'm just going to straighten this up a bit from this morning. We're going to start by cutting off a section about this size and put the rest of the banana over here and unpeel it. I'm just going to do this on the plate so it's sort of easier for you guys to see. There we go, move that aside. So this is going to be our coral polyp's body, and the first thing that we need to do is we're going to take our toothpick and we're going to give it a mouth. So the way we give it a mouth is just by making a sort of a decent sized hole in the middle here. Okay. And in fact, a coral polyp uses its mouth both for bringing food out and shoving any waste back through its mouth out into the ocean. So that's how it gets rid of its waste matter. Now, I said before that corals don't swim around the ocean like a jellyfish. They are stuck to the bottom of the sea, and so we're going to take a biscuit. I'm going to put the biscuit next to it down here, and this biscuit is going to be the hard bottom of the ocean. And we're going to stick our bit of banana or jellyfish onto the bottom of the ocean using a little spoonful of jam. So I'm going to put on there. And I'm just going to place the banana. There we go. Use a knife just to tidy things up a bit. There we go. So there we have our coral polyp stuck to the bottom of the ocean. And it needs to have this rocky seafloor, not the sandy seafloor that you might see around and about. For the next stage, we're going to have to think about how a coral eats, and it gets its food in a couple of ways. So we're going to use mine ones are not rather than sandy now, but I use our sort of sugary string straws. I'm going to cut some segments off of those, and these are going to be the tentacles. Now the hard corals, the corals we're looking at out on the reef, have six tentacles, or multiples of 6 tentacles. So I'm going to cut off 6 sections here. You can also use a pair of scissors, often a little bit easier, just to cut those off. There we go, that's 4, 5, 6, and I'll just lay those out next to the polyp on my plate. So here are our tentacles, and we're going to use these to show, like a jellyfish. Sorry, I've got ants and flies are attacking my jam. We're going to use these to show how the coral polyp catches its food. And we're going to make 6 holes round the outside. Ooh. Hopefully it's not as hot where you are as it is here, because I've got a slightly mushy tropical banana here. So there's 6 holes around the outside. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put the tentacle down into each of these holes. I'm just going to go around and do 6 of these tentacles. There we go. There's 2. Oh, turn that round to make it easier. 3. 4. 5. Oh dear, it's gone a bit, and I'm going to have the space for one more in here. 6. Try not to get them straight through the mouth. There we go. So there is my coral polyp with 6 tentacles in it. Now the coral polyp is going to be using those tentacles, much like a jellyfish does, to catch small animals, like what we call zooplankton, tiny animals that drift on the ocean current. That might also have the larvae of larger animals such as crabs, and it also there might be eggs in that plankton as well. And it uses those tentacles, catches the plankton coming through the ocean, and brings it into its mouth. And it's got actually little sort of harpoon cells on its tentacles. Some of them really, really stingy, but most just feel a little bit sticky. Bring those into its mouth and then digest them. Tomorrow we'll be hopefully feeding a baby coral, and you can see that action live. But I just want to take you on a little trip down past the point to have a look at some of the Elkhorn Coral, which is round the corner. And if you've ever been swimming in sort of like the UK or somewhere like that, versus swimming, as you can see, the footage we've just got, it's a beautiful, you know, to start off with, aren't those Elkhorn amazing? Called Elkhorn because the shape of the coral resembles the horns of an elk or moose. But for me, it's, you know, you've got the diversity of color, but it's also the clarity of the water. The water is really, really clear. And this means that there isn't that much food for the coral polyp to grab out of the water. Now, I'm not sure whether we're still on that clip, but what can you notice about the color of the coral? Is it maybe like a vegetable color, if we think about that question? So corals have got a really, really, really cool trick to get more energy in these clear waters where there isn't that much food floating by. And we don't have, I'm just going to put these on the plate. Imagine instead of going to get food from the shops, you in fact had a vegetable garden inside you that was producing sugars, plants inside you producing food for you to eat. That's what the coral polyp has done. It's got a relationship with a type of algae called Photosynthesis, and I'm just going to show you down on the plate here. We're using these green sugar sprinkles to represent that algae. I'm just going to take the sugar sprinkles and put them on top there. Okay. They're actually inside the tissue, and it's what gives the coral these amazing natural colors, these greens, oranges, yellows, browns on the reef. So I'm not sure whether you've come to photosynthesis yet in your classes, in your science classes, but that's how plants make sugars using sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. That is the same thing that happens inside the coral polyp, and it gets about 70 to 90%, so that's 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10 meals, as it were, from these algae, and only sort of 1 to 3 out of 10 meals from catching the zooplankton with its tentacles. I'm looking at my amazing, incredible polyp. It can get food It can get bonus turbo food to grow the amazing reef. But what I can see on the side here is that any type of grazing fish may be able to come and nibble it. So what's incredible about the polyp is that it takes minerals, and it's the mineral I spoke to you about before, from the ocean, calcium carbonate, which you may know better as limestone or chalk, and it forms a calcium carbonate cup, or technically a corallite. There's a good science word for you, corallite. And just down on my polyp here, I'm breaking up a biscuit, and I'm using that to represent the corallite, this calcium carbonate cup. And there's the last section there. There we go. And over time, and I'm just going to hold up this big coral boulder so you can see the little sort of pockets, cups, where the coral polyps live. And we can zoom in on that, Ellie. I'm just going to hold it steady. Do you want me to bring it closer to the camera? That's fine. Great. So you can see there's little sort of holes there, and that's where the polyps will be living. But you can see it's absolutely huge, the amount of calcium carbonate that these small creatures have taken out of the water and used to make their structure. So going back to our original question, is coral an animal, a vegetable, or a mineral? We see that it's an animal related to the jellyfish and the sea anemone. It uses algae to supercharge itself and takes mineral from the water to grow these amazing, amazing structures. If I'm looking down, I'm sure I can see actually some really, really brilliant examples of an incredible edible polyp. We would love to see your creations online, so either do email them to us, or if you have teachers or adults who are using social media, then it'd be great to see those with a hashtag Coral Live online as well. They look fantastic, and I'd love to see a proper photograph of some of those in just a bit, as soon as we finish the lesson. But I'm just going to lift up my incredible edible polyp. What do you reckon, Ellie? Should we have a second coral breakfast? I'm just going to taste. You going to taste yours? I'm going to taste mine. Ah. Oh, wow. Oh. Oh. Well, I think it's better at showing a science than it is at being a delicious snack, but you know, you may think differently. But really, really wonderful to share with you that in fact the amazing reef all around the world is created by this tiny creature, the coral polyp. I've seen some of the questions you sent through. Sorry. And we will find out how we might be able to keep this wonderful animal safe, healthy into the future, and so that we can keep this amazing marine ocean environment for a long, long time and many years to come. Thank you very much. We're now going to shift to the Q&A section. So I'm going to check the phone to see all the questions that you're sending through, and we'll come to those just now. So let's see what we've got. We've got some very quick shout outs. We've got Cloverley Primary, fantastic to have you with us. Kirk Newton in Scotland, hi. And Norton College in North Yorkshire, fantastic to have you and have you with the incredible edible polyp activity. Louis, fantastic question. How hard is coral? Well, the coral polyp itself is quite smushy, but as we've seen, the coral creates this amazing hard structure here. So that's pretty hard, although I managed to cover myself in coral dust. But there we go. So hard. You do also get a type of coral called soft coral. And those can be, those have a sort of like more of a structure, sort of like an internal structure using the sort of calcium carbonate to give them some shape. But those sort of a bit more bendy. And you might also see a sea fan. If you look online, or I don't know whether we can pop something on social media of a sea fan, really, really beautiful example of a soft coral. Fantastic. Charlesworth Primary, what is coral made of? Well, I really hope everyone at Charlesworth Primary that when you go home this evening and share what you've learned today, I hope you won't say that a coral is made out of banana and biscuits. I hope instead you'll say it's a very, very amazing animal, like a jellyfish, but tiny and smushed to the ocean, and it uses the chalk mineral to create, or limestone mineral more exact, to create these amazing, amazing shapes, whether those are the brain-shaped balls that you can find or the wonderfully beautiful branching Elkhorn coral. Really great question. Lola Rose from Clifford Primary. Wonderful, really lovely question, and thank you so much, Lola Rose. It's great. What does coral do? Coral is what we call a habitat-forming animal. Now, a habitat is a place where living things live. That might be a mountainside, it might be a forest, it might be a meadow, it might be a river. In this case, it's part of the ocean. And what the coral does, as you've seen in the video from just around here, is it creates an amazing three-dimensional space. And that provides a home for all sorts of different animals. And in fact, 25% or 1/4 of all species, all types of living thing that are in the ocean call the coral reef its home. So the coral reef covers a very tiny fraction of the ocean, but supports a huge amount of the different living things that we can find here. And that might be everything from a clownfish, Demo, it could be a snake, it could be a parrotfish, it could be a mantis shrimp, it could be a Christmas tree worm. And Lola Rose, do have a look at some of these photographs on the website afterwards, because it supports all these amazing different animals. And perhaps the sort of most disgusting but interesting one is a sea cucumber. So I hope you all have a look at a sea cucumber afterwards. Great question. Where are we? How does coral grow? And that's from the Royal School in Wolverhampton. It's a really, really interesting question. So the coral structures you see grow in a process called budding. And that's where you have one coral polyp with its calcium carbonate cup, and then it goes into two, and they divide, and they divide, and they divide, and they divide. So each coral colony, and that's what we call the overall sort of like structure you can see, the single structures you can see, is started by a single coral larva that settles on the bottom of the ocean, on this hard bottom, and then buds, splits and splits and splits and splits and splits over time to form these amazing structures. So it's like living with thousands of your twins, basically, because it's all the same genetic material. How many, great question from the Royal School Wolverhampton, We can get more into, in fact, we're doing much more on coral reproduction tomorrow at the same time. How many different species of coral are there? And that's from Sophia at Clitheroe Primary. For hard coral, it's about 600-700. I think about 650 tropical hard coral species around the world. You find, if you go somewhere like the Great Barrier Reef, I think there's about sort of 360, 370 of these sort of hard coral species, the ones that you typically see in these amazing shapes. Around Curacao, it's about 65, 70 species of hard coral. This doesn't include all the soft corals, the deep water corals and everything else. These are sort of the typical tropical shallow corals that we sort of like, when we say coral, that's what we mean. So about 600. Whew. Elsa, awesome question, Elsa. What is the rarest type of coral? So, without getting into sort of scientific names, there are. I'm just going to go back to the Elkhorn, because it was an incredibly common coral here. Hurricane Omar, about 20 odd years ago, or was it 12 years ago, sort of took out large amounts of, with the force, knocked down a lot of these groves, which were sort of weakened, and so it is an endangered coral, and there are a number of endangered coral species around the world as they face a lot of threats. But we are discovering, especially more and more about coral over time. But I would go for the Elkhorn as being one of the most endangered around here. Poppy. Great question. Can coral come in different colors? Yes, Poppy. So, as I was mentioning before, the coral animal is sort of see-through like a jellyfish, and it gets its color from the algae, this plant-like living thing that is inside it. So the kinds of colors that it usually gets are greens and browns and reds and yellows, but all different kinds of shades. Now, sometimes you find blues and purples on a coral reef, on the coral, and that is when you have very shallow coral, so very near the surface, where the sun is its strongest. And what the coral animal has done is to create a chemical inside it that acts like sunscreen. Okay, so sometimes you get that blue and purple coming through from that. If you see super colorful structures on a coral reef, like bright blues and reds and oranges, like really bright, vibrant ones, those are most normally sponges. And we're going to be having a look at some sponges in the wet lab on Thursday. Thursday? Yes, Thursday. So if you want to see the sponges in the aquaria, in the wet lab, then Thursday we can show you some of those and talk to you more about the sponge on the reef. Oh wow, we've got all the questions coming through. How does coral die? That's from Charlesworth Primary and Clovelly Primary in Bermuda. So coral, like a lot of animals, has a sort of natural life. You do get some really sort of long-lived coral and black corals in the deep ocean, living for thousands of years. That's a sort of natural length of time. But you will find that they can be harmed in lots of different ways, from pollution, from the changes in temperature, from storms, that kind of thing, being broken up by storms. Kirk Newton Primary, what does coral eat? Hopefully everyone at Kirk Newton, you will have learned by now that the coral gets about 1 to 3 in 10 meals from catching things with its tentacles. It's a little crustacea, larvae, eggs from the water. But because we've got these tropical corals, tropical clear water, it also gets a lot of its energy through the algae, the plant-like living things inside its tissue. Holt and St. Peter School, how long does coral live? I think the longest, from memory, the longest lived coral is a deep water coral, black coral, and I think it's about 4,500, 5,000 years old. I'll check that, but that's from memory. That's the oldest coral that we know of. Of course, vast swathes of the ocean unexplored, so there could be an older coral out there somewhere. This is an awesome question. What is the coral reef? And that's from Aldo at the Royal School in Wolverhampton. Aldo, what is a coral reef? Very basically, we started using the word reef, or sailors started using the word reef, and that is a sort of something you might bump into in a boat. So very scared about grounding your boat on these rocky things in the ocean. Then we found out that these rocky things were made by this coral animal. Then we found out that the coral reef was in fact this support system for 25%, 1/4 of all marine life. So we could say that the coral reef is the rocky structure created by the coral animal. We could say that it's in fact the animal itself and its structures are part of it. Or we could say it's one of the most important habitats on the planet, supporting a huge, huge, huge number of different living things, some of which we talked about earlier, from fish to shrimps to sea cucumbers, sea slugs, sharks, all these amazing forms of life. But a really interesting question, Aldo. Thank you so much for that. Lovely question from Zander at Clitha Primary. Where in the world are coral reefs located? Coral reefs, well, the coral animal, I know I've just eaten this one in half. Imagine, don't point, but imagine the fussiest sort of young person you know. I don't like broccoli, I don't like sweet corn, I can only be in a room if it's this temperature, I can only do this, I can only do that. That's a little bit like coral polyps. So they live in a band around the tropics. So they can do sort of water between about 18, maybe 20 and just under 30 degrees Celsius. They don't like it to be too deep. So they like between about, sometimes a few meters, and for the shallow reef, just down to about 20 meters, 25 meters, maybe 30. They like nice clear water so the sun can get through, so nothing too much sort of sediment, sort of like sandy, muddy stuff in it. They like, and it all has to be really, really stable for them. So you're going to find coral reefs around a band around the tropics, and the tropics are the regions either side of the equator. If you've got a map in the classroom, you can point those out, and we may have a map somewhere. If not, we can always post it later. And you'll find them on the shallow bits, and you'll find them only not just shallow, but it has to be rocky. You can't be like a sandy beach. And it will also not be too near like a river mouth or places where there's a lot of sort of stuff in the water. It's like this nice clear water. But really great question, Sandra. Thank you for that. I'm just finding out where we are. If coral is eaten, and this is from Charlie at Atelier 21 school, if coral is eaten, how does it survive? Well, for the coral that is eaten, it doesn't survive. But I'm just going to go back a bit. So the coral has this calcium carbonate cup, this chalky limestone cup to keep it safe. There are some animals that are specialist coral eaters. The technical word is a corallivore, and they might munch a bit of coral, but there aren't too many of them. Corals die for a variety of other reasons. So it doesn't get eaten that much, but one of the species that might eat some coral is a parrotfish. It's got that parrot-shaped beak to it to help it scrape the coral, and then it grinds up the mineral that makes up the reef and poops it out, and those sort of white clouds form the beaches that sort of munches up the limestone to form the beaches where we are. Really great question. We've got time for, I think, 2 or 3 more questions. Is some of the rock under coral reefs volcanic rock? That's Nicholas from Bermuda. Certainly. So a lot of coral reefs have formed from volcanic activity, and then that new, often the sinking of the volcano, helps to form these very beautiful lagoons, these sort of like circular shaped reefs as it sinks down. But it is really the movement often of the subsea, of the ground under the water. So for instance, this area where we are, Curacao, has been lifted up through sort of volcanic, sort of like earth movement activity over the centuries. It's not a volcano itself, this area has been sort of lifted up. In lots of places in the Pacific, it is because of volcanic activity. And I know if you look at Bermuda, and you look at not just the island, because it's got that sort of almost that hook shape, but if you look at the whole thing, you can actually see the circle of the old volcano, and that provides that shallow platform for the corals to grow in their really nice sort of like 2 meters to 30 meters space. We're gonna we've got time for, I think, just sort of 2 more questions. Luke, thank you so much for asking this, from Clifford Primary. Why did you become interested in coral? The first time you see a coral reef, Luke, it's like seeing another world. It feels like one of those cartoons where there's sort of bright colors and animals and movement everywhere, and it just feels extraordinary that that kind of place exists on this planet. It feels like it shouldn't be real, but it is. And you can't help but fall in love with it. And I hope that you have an opportunity, Luke, to see the coral reef with your own eyes one day. But for now, I think you will have to make do with some of the clips and from any other documentaries or aquaria that you might visit. It's a really, really special place, and I do hope you get a chance to visit it one day, and even perhaps study it. But the last question we've got is from St. Catherine's, and it's, how do coral reefs get damaged by humans? And I don't want to really focus on the damage, St. Catherine's, because I just want to focus on, we know things that damage the wider environment. We know about pollution, we know about greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, we know about trash and the amount of waste there is. So instead, as we end this lesson, is just to think about what you can do, and perhaps post some ideas, again, using the social media tags and handles. Can you think of something that is a more fun and more sustainable way to travel? tastier and more sustainable way to eat. Could this be one meal? And something that's more fun than buying a new thing. If you gave somebody a present, okay, here's go. A Christmas present for someone in your life that's more fun than a thing. So there we go. Have a think about travel, food, and stuff. And that's how I'd love to end this lesson. Thank you so much for being part of this What is Coral lesson, finding out about our polyps, finding out about the amazing reef, answering your beautiful, lovely questions. You all sound amazing, young people, and I really hope to see some of you out on the reef, out doing science in the future. We're always here to support you on that journey, but for now, it's goodbye from AXA Coral Live from Curacao and the Kamabi Research Station. We look forward to talking to you again during Coral Live, but until then, it's bye-bye.